The Saga of Tanya the Evil, or Youjo Senki in Japanese, is an alt-history World War I fantasy isekai, yes I know how that sounds, that premiered in January 2017. It's an adaptation of the identically titled light novel series which I have not read, meaning this video will be reviewing the series not as an adaptation, but as a standalone product. The series currently spans one 12-episode season and a movie. Season 2 has been confirmed, though that was several years ago, so who knows when that's happening. But that being said, let's take a look at it and see if it's worth a watch. Mild spoiler warning for the first 3 episodes or so. Sorry, but it's pretty much unavoidable if I want to give this thing a proper review. So first things first, let's try to pick apart that interesting setting. The condensed version is that in modern day Japan, our protagonist is a human resources worker and he is a psychopath. Not serial killer, but definitely lacking in empathy. After work, a guy he fired that day shoves him in front of a train and God pauses time to have a chat. He then proceeds to debate the rationality of the existence of God with God. Yeah, he's basically a Reddit atheist. God then decides to basically fuck with him by reincarnating him into an alternate universe as an orphaned girl named Tanya, though she does retain the memories of her previous life. This universe is reminiscent of early 20th century Earth, though there are numerous differences, with geopolitics in particular only sharing surface-level similarities with the real world. Tanya is born into a nation known only as the Empire, which is styled after Germany and is currently at the brink of war for reasons that are never fully explained, though it's safe to assume that it's imperialist in nature. Magic is a thing in this universe, and Tanya is naturally gifted in it, so she volunteers for the military at age 9 since it's either that or a lifetime of squalor. She finds success due to her intelligence and knowledge of real-world military history, so the series' focus is on Tanya's military career and the overall progress of the war, along with the occasional bit of divine intervention. So right off the bat, I see a magic system and I want to talk about it because magic is awesome and I like magic. No, not you, magic, wait your turn. I'm still working on your video. The magic system of Tanya the Evil is kind of in the middle of soft versus hard. There are pretty standardized uses for it, but the series never really goes into the nitty-gritty of how it all works. But essentially, it doesn't seem like magical ability on its own does all that much. We see Tanya levitate some shit, but not much besides that. And even then, she's established as being incredibly magically gifted. But when augmented by technology, it allows the magically adept to become a mage, which in this universe is a military designation like infantryman, marksman, or artillery gunner. Mages can use magic-powered personal flying devices, can conjure kinetic shields to protect against enemy attack, can fire spells from their weapons, which just pretty much makes them more powerful and colorful, and with a bit of charge time, they can also fire long-range explosive spells as a form of artillery. As a magic system, it's pretty simple, and it's pretty clear that whatever complexity does exist in its rules and whatnot just don't really matter for the purposes of this story. Suffice it to say that mages are a thing, and Tanya is a very good one. What's more interesting is the impact it has on the war and by extension, the world building. The non-magical elements of the war are more or less in line with World War I, with plenty of infantry, cannons, trench warfare, and the like. In the real world, one of the crucial elements of World War I was the introduction of aircraft, where both sides continually fought for air supremacy. The dogfighting aces of World War I are entirely replaced by mages in Tanya the Evil. While aircraft are used in the war, they serve mostly supportive roles, be it transport or dropping bombs. I think this is a very fascinating use of the concept of magic. Of course, blends of technology and magic are nothing new, but the idea that magic is weak as a standalone force, but also enables unique utility once it's capable of being harnessed by technology is such a cool world-building thing to me. And because our protagonist is a mage leading a company of other mages, we see the army and the world at large continually have to adapt and deal with this presumably new form of warfare, with different nations having slightly different ideas of how to utilize them, and one in particular seems to be noticeably behind the curve in that regard. Notably, this mirrors real-life World War I, which was the first real modern war, at least on a large scale. And there were instances of countries bringing horses to a machine gun fight, which went about as well as you'd expect. So far, the world-building impact has mostly been small-scale, with Tanya's unit being able to execute on military strategies designed around their high mobility, flight capability, and destructive power. While that's all well and good, I hope that the series takes a deeper look at the ways this new magical tech can fundamentally shift the nature of not only the war, but the world at large, just like airplanes did in the real world. So obviously there are a lot of parallels to the real world, but I have to talk about the fact that a lot of people seem to like to misrepresent what this series is. Stylistically, it looks like a series about Imperial Germany trying to conquer the world in World War I times. Because it looks so similar to a historical event that massively shaped our real world, I've noticed that a lot of people like to project real-world things onto Tanya the Evil when it just doesn't make sense to. There have been claims that it glorifies Nazi Germany. There have been claims that it whitewashes war crimes. There have been claims that because it features other stylized countries with inferior militaries to the Empire, that somehow indicates bigotry against those countries' real-life counterparts. In fact, since I like to go into anime as blind as possible, I only had little bits and pieces of online discourse to inform my expectations. So I was expecting the titular Tanya to essentially take up the role as leader of an alt-history Nazi Germany with all the fucked up elements of the real deal. But the more I watched the series, the more I realized that while yes, the lolly Hitler memes are fucking funny, there's absolutely nothing in the anime that leads me to believe that the accusations levied against it hold any weight whatsoever. In fact, the series is remarkably devoid of in-universe politics. Aside from an extremely broad look at the diplomatic situation, we don't really get to see the internal mechanisms of these countries, and we barely even know how they're structured. Most of the info you can glean about the world governments is literally from their names, such as how the Empire is a monarchistic empire or how the Republic is a republic. We don't know much of anything about the civilians of the various countries except those that are displaced by the battles Tanya is involved in. We don't know about the economies of anyone beyond the fact that the war strains the finances of all combatants. This series is pretty well contained to just the military and nothing else. To apply real-world politics to it is completely ridiculous in my opinion. Anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is either stupid, blinded by emotion or ideology, or engaging in a bit of creative writing. I don't usually make bold statements like that about opinions, but these people are just wrong. But even though Tanya isn't lolly Hitler, she's also not a very good person. After all, she's not called Tanya the Bit of a Bitch. If you remember from earlier in the video, I mentioned that Tanya is a psychopath. To be clear, by psychopath, I don't mean that she can't function in society, that she's prone to criminality, or anything you'd normally associate with the term. She's not Dahmer is what I'm getting at. Rather, she just doesn't have anything resembling a genuine moral code or empathy for her fellow humans. In her past life, she held a position of relative authority in an office building, and in the real world, it's not uncommon for those who succeed in the corporate world to have high-functioning psychopathic tendencies. Again, doesn't mean they've ever been violent or have any malice towards others, but they're in a position to succeed because they're able to have this single-minded look-out for number one mentality. So take someone like that and put her into a situation where she has extraordinary magical ability, high intelligence, and is able to fight in the military of a country with questionable ethics. I mean, come on, they let a fucking 9-year-old enlist. Let's not pretend they're angels here. Once she obtains authority, she's given a lot of leeway, and her superiors seem to value pragmatism over ethics, so they don't care when she does shady shit as long as she gets results. She delivers an evacuation order in a deliberately childlike voice to convince the enemy it's a prank, allowing her to initiate a surprise attack that's technically not a war crime. She uses a loophole in international law to justify declaring an entire enemy city's inhabitants to be enemy combatants, ensuring that her unit does not need to dedicate their attention to avoiding collateral damage. She beats the shit out of people with her rifle to cement her authority. She will use, abuse, and manipulate those around her as long as it can get her what she wants. She's pretty awful by any metric, and she's described as a monster multiple times by allies and enemies alike. But it's hard not to root for her. And honestly, I'm having a bit of trouble really nailing down why. I mean, part of it is because everyone loves a good anti-hero, but she's not what I would call particularly likable. And yet I love seeing her develop as a military strategist. I love seeing her petty feud with God, who she stubbornly insists on referring to as being X because despite multiple conversations with the dude, she refuses to accept that he's God. This is a character who doesn't have all that much depth to her, but she's fascinating nonetheless. I've described things like this before, but she comes across as rather surface level with a very interesting surface. She does kind of slowly develop a sense of pride in her place in the military as the series progresses, but for the most part, what you see is what you get. And that actually rings true for the series as a whole. There isn't really a whole lot underneath the hood. There are exciting fight scenes and cool military excursions and a fun protagonist, but the series honestly doesn't do all that much on a deeper level. At least at this point, that could obviously change with future seasons. Occasionally they'll try to introduce a subplot or examine some sort of underlying theme, but they never really get the attention they deserve. Like, at one point one of the soldiers under Tanya's command has a bit of an ethical crisis due to the whole technically not war crimes thing. I won't tell you how that gets resolved, but it doesn't take long and it's not very satisfying. There's also an interesting dynamic with religiosity. Tanya retains her disdain for spirituality, though she does pay it lip service for reasons I won't get into here. But her allies and her enemies all tend to be very pious, often to the point of zealotry, and that contrast makes writing nerds like me jizz our pants because we fucking love foils. But while it is pretty awesome on an aesthetic level, it doesn't really go beyond that, and I think that's quite the missed opportunity. I would love to see them dig deeper into the religious beliefs of the various characters and how they perceive the world and the war. the scientist who receives divine inspiration, the Imperial soldiers who believe God is leading them forward, Tanya who actively hates God, enemy soldiers who call upon God to fuel their rage against Tanya specifically. There's a lot of great things here that are just begging to be explored, but the series just hasn't gotten around to it, I guess. The one exception would be a series of events that spanned roughly a third of Season 1. I won't go into details because spoilers, but we do get to see a character go through a full, if somewhat short, character arc that sets up another character who's clearly going to be the main antagonist in Season 2, and I felt like that was done pretty well. But overall, I'd have to describe the Saga of Tanya the Evil as flashy and exciting, but containing nothing for me to sink my teeth into. So should you watch it? Well, I'd say it depends on what you're looking for. If you want something complex that really wants to build up its cast, world, and plot, Tanya the Evil's probably not going to be your go-to. But if you're just looking for something fun and filled with balls-to-the-wall action and intrigue, there are definitely worse options out there. Overall, I had a good time with the show, and I do give it a tentative recommendation. And granted, most of my complaints are due to a lack of care to anything beneath the surface, which could very well be resolved as the series continues. So yeah, I'd say if you're looking for something fun, give it a watch. Thanks for watching. Big thank you to my patrons, especially my God tier supporters Bulk Squat Thrust and Michael Rotolo. Don't forget to click all the YouTube buttons below and let me know what you thought of the video, and if you have any recommendations for the next review. As I teased earlier in the video, I'm working on Rant 6. I'm just wrapping up the post-game content, so it shouldn't be too long before the video's out, though you'll probably see 1 or 2 anime reviews before that's ready. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the Electro Swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back.